prevention, preparedness, and resilience, particularly in LMICs and MICs. History has taught us that peacetime should be utilized for building suitable networks and nurturing partnerships so as to have adequate systems in place. Research and development and manufacturing hubs for medical countermeasures, along with a global coordination platform, needs to be prioritized. Pandemic Fund, we believe, in active collaboration with G20, should facilitate establishing an end-to-end global medical countermeasure coordinating platform. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of food for thought and for us to think about as the Pandemic Fund designs its first call for proposals. May I turn to Elena Flores now? Elena, the European Commission has been a strong supporter of the Pandemic Fund. What, in your view, are the main ways in which the fund can add value?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Priya, for the question. And well, first of all, thanks to the Indonesian presidency for having been really driving this until today. This is really a great success, and thanks also to the previous Italian presidency for the same support. And we are now here with having a very good deliverable. Now, the question about the value added. You will remember that the need for a fund to address systemic risk and for deadly and costly epidemics or pandemics was already discussed at the time of the Ebola epidemic in 2014-16. However, the COVID-19 brought to the fore really the urgent need of collective action to prevent, detect, and rapidly respond to pandemics. And as has been many times said, and we all know, this is not going to be the last one. So it's really critical that we are in a position to mobilize financing in an effective and equitable manner in order to be better prepared for the next pandemic. Now, we have been committed, the European Commission and the European Union, since the very beginning. We have been a strong supporter because we really believe. We believe that there is a need for a financial intermediary fund, and we really believe that this is going to provide strong value added. And this is the reason why we have been in a position to mobilize $450 million as a first contributor together with the US. So that demonstrates our conviction that this fund is going to provide value added. First, where we see the value added. First, because we think that the fund is going to fill existing gaps in the architecture, and we think that it is very important that this funding is going to be sustained, and it can be sustained over the medium term, because that operation requires time, and we have to make sure that these funds are there in order to support that. And this is important because it will be providing value added, as it has been said, as a catalyst to support also existing initiatives. So we see a complementarity and a role to reinforce other existing capacities. Second, we think the fund, by complementing and reinforcing the WHO in its normative and technical role, will provide also very important value added. And here we see that the fund is also a tool in order to make sure that other resources are not deviated for their purpose, so that the development resources remain to be used for what they have to be used, and here we have a supplementary fund in order to reinforce the pandemic preparedness. Third, we think that it is important because it has a leverage function, so we think that the fund can really mobilize other public and private financing, which is absolutely necessary to make this a success. And the principle of inclusivity and the participation of co-investors on a balanced footing with donors in the governance is key for that objective. And finally, we think that this creation of the fund provides really a momentum, a political, economic, and social attention that needs to be given to strengthening health systems. And for that reason is why we think it's so important that G20 remains in the driving seat to keep this political push and political momentum going forward. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you for that. So let me turn next to Dr. Van Trotzenberg. The World Bank has been instrumental in developing the pandemic fund. Can you talk about why it's needed, in your perspective?
Well, I think to think about this fund is really to think about the cost. The world was ill prepared for this COVID crisis. And we have paid a terrible price in terms of human loss. But we should also keep in mind that we have been making constantly progress in reducing extreme poverty. And now we have again an increase of extreme poverty. And there's over 100 million people. We should never forget that. There were hundreds of millions of kids out of school. Many are staying out of school permanently, particularly girls. It has been long-term cost on development. That is not acceptable. So I think that we can say that these crises, unfortunately, may again come. So complacency is no longer an option. And as Elena said, there were discussions maybe of Ebola. And maybe one of the problems was Ebola didn't affect the whole world. And therefore, we couldn't get that off the ground. COVID has changed the logic. And therefore, I think this fund isn't a direct response. It was overdue, and we need it. It's as a complement to, of course, healthcare system strengthening, but it provides a very sharp focus on preparedness, not for today, it is permanently. Secondly, it is the challenge to all, meaning the domestic effort has to be central, including on financing, but it should be complemented by external support. And that external support is what this fund tries to capture. It can provide critically needed seed money to complement it, and then we can provide also sharing with best practices. That's the reason that this fund provides also a wonderful new opportunity of collaboration with the WHO, with other UN agencies, with bilateral agency. Nobody has it all, the package. We'll need to complement each other where everyone is sitting. And that is, I think, where is the strength of this FIF is coming from. It is together. But I think we need always to keep in mind that the human loss and the fact that we saw again increase in absolute poverty, extreme poverty, that is an unacceptable notion, and we have to address that.
Thank you. Let me turn to Dr. Basri. Dr. Basri, can you tell us your perspective of how this fund can help, what role it has to play?
Well, thank you very much, Priya. First of all, I would like to thank the G20 and Indonesia and Italy presidency to make this pandemic fund happen. But back to your question, I think very similar like Axel. One thing that we learned from this COVID-19 pandemic is we realized that health is an investment. It's not only spending or consumptions that we need, it's really input for the economic activities. Yeah. So once the health system collapsed, then we realized that how the economy collapsed as well. So the COVID-19 pandemic gave a very good lesson learned for us about the preparation, anticipation for if there will be a sort of like a pandemic in the future. Now, perhaps we can look at whether we are ready for that. And we have to be honest that the current global financing is ill-equipped to provide security from the pandemics and also fragmented, siloed, inefficient, ad hoc, and unpredictable. So under this kind of situation, financing prevention is particularly weak. That is why we need to establish a sort of like an institution to address this issue. We do understand that the WHO play a very central role in the global health. But the WHO itself is not a funding agency. So that is why we need to collaboration with the institution like World Bank. Yeah, that's the reason why this establishment of this pandemic fund somehow could bridge the issue of the sustainability of the funding and also the addressing the concern of the pandemic on the other side. And I think this pandemic fund has a unique role to making the world safer because it is investment in the global public goods. And as President Malpass mentioned in his remarks, investment on strengthening the pandemic prevention response in low and middle income countries, these will save millions of lives and also money in the future. And the way we look at it, this decision is not only that, I think this is the first time that the international community come together to invest on fundings for the prevention, preparedness, and response in developing countries. So this is something that very important. This is the testament of the multilateralism in the midst of many doubt about the issue of the multilateralism at this moment. So with that, I think this is a very important milestone and achievement. And I would like to say also in addition to that, we are facing about multiple crises and competing priorities. If I'm not mistaken, Secretary Yellen mentioned about it as well, a couple months ago. And this new fund is dedicated PPR to help the international community to secure funding, for the financing agenda. So, and in addition to that, it also will encourage the country to prioritize PPR and increase their own efforts. So I'll back to you, Priya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we've heard a very compelling case for the fund. We've heard from all of you on why it's needed and how it can help. And I think underscoring all this is COVID-19 was a wake-up call. Let's not fall into yet another cycle of panic followed by neglect. Let's do something now and make sure that the next pandemic that could be around the corner is a pandemic that the world is much better prepared to handle. So thank you all for those very thoughtful ideas and comments on the first question. Let's turn now to the second round, which is more about kind of forward-looking. But let me again start with Secretary Yellen. How does the pandemic fund structure help the world prepare better for future pandemics and drive the potential for success?
Well, thanks, Priya. Thanks, Priya. Let me start by underscoring just how important it is to be establishing a financing mechanism that's designed to fill gaps in pandemic preparedness and to do it in a way that both complements and reinforces the existing global health architecture. We considered a range of financing mechanisms and ultimately decided to support a financial intermediary fund because of its flexible structure and its ability to work through an array of implementing entities to fund pandemic preparedness. And I think the fund's principles provide the foundation for its success. First, it's designed to complement existing institutions. While we don't know where the next pandemic will come from or how it will manifest, we know the pandemic fund will be most effective when it buttresses the work of existing institutions. And that's why the pandemic fund is not adding another institution to an already fragmented global health architecture. Instead, its purpose is to channel resources through organizations with a strong track record, and its aim is to increase collaboration among these entities. Second, the pandemic fund's financing needs to be catalytic and to incentivize investments from other sources in pandemic preparedness. That will require significant coordinated investment up front because the alternative is much costlier. As we think about what the pandemic fund's co-investment framework will look like, we need to take into account how catalytic funding may vary for different countries in this fiscal environment. Third, the pandemic fund's resources must be truly additive. Financing to or from the pandemic fund does not replace existing funding streams. It allows for flexibility and innovation on top of the core work that is already happening. And even with the pandemic fund's existing resources, we face questions about sustainable financing. And I would challenge us to consider innovative options for addressing this. Finally, the pandemic fund will work in a flexible, inclusive, and transparent manner. It needs to be able to adapt to a changing institutional landscape and react to different pathogens as or even before they emerge. A crucial part of this is incorporating diverse voices into decisions on priority and funding, as well as clearly communicating decisions to stakeholders. So the principles I just outlined, I see as the foundation for how the pandemic fund will work to address country, regional, and global dimensions of pandemic preparedness. And as COVID-19 has demonstrated, the challenges we face today require global solutions. And I believe the pandemic fund is a kind of test case for how the global community and multilateral system come together to address cross-border challenges.
Thank you, Secretary Yellen. And I think those principles that you just outlined, those principles really are a product of all the collective thinking that went into the design, and so many of our partners that contributed to that thinking are here today. So thank you all so much, and I think we do have a very robust structure. If I can just turn now to Dr. Van Trotzenberg. So Secretary Yellen spoke about these key principles. If I can just pick up on a couple of those on the complementarity and catalytic aspects of the fund. Would you be able to share with us how, in your view, we can ensure that this complementarity does actually translate kind of into the work of the fund, and also how can we ensure additional long-term financing for low and middle income countries through this fund?
So I think one of the challenges is what we are also facing, for example, with climate change now, is we have to think differently about our operations, meaning we need to, what I always say, DNA, for example, climate into all our operations. Similarly, when we are thinking about pandemic preparedness, that needs to be DNA'd. It cannot be a separate part. So I think this is one of the areas where also in the design area, particularly when we are talking about health system strengthening, we need to make sure that this is an integrated part of it. And there we have to work it. Now, I think we are seeing that, for example, in the case of the IDA negotiations, that was already captured also in terms of having these preparedness plans. So this could be a very nice complement how the pandemic fund together with IDA can work in the low-income countries. And that is what is needed. Ultimately, also how the collaboration with WHO is raised to a new level. It's not like we'll exchange it. This becomes an operationally more relevant relationship as opposed to exchange relationship of information and all that. So I think this is something where we need to think it. So that is one point. I'm agreeing with the principles the Secretary just laid out. If I can add one more important, it's maybe principle, but it is almost, it is excellent coordination which will be required among the institutions about the bilaterals and particularly with the countries we try to serve, so that we actually have that system in place on this, and that will require, and I think this is also for this fund, an enormous chance in to bring here the different actors together and allow us to identify where we are doing well and where maybe we are having shortfalls and where we can do better, and that we will need to do. I think we need to think also broadly, for example, the One Health initiative that have this, and see how these efforts can complement each other well. And a final maybe idea is how can we help low-income countries to strengthen their institutional capacities? And I'm also thinking of the international thing of, for example, Africa CDC that has been going, and I think they have been making good progress, but they need further support. And that could be a very important force in implementing, following, and bring that when you just mentioned sustainability, it's not only on the financing, it is also the institutionally sustainable efforts that we need to ensure. The last question, I think the secretary, about additionality. That is the most painful question, because these days everybody is stressed fiscally, and so we really need to see how we can ensure that additionality. But we need to have a sharp focus on this. I would agree that we may actually need to monitor that carefully so that indeed there is not a substitution exercise going on, but that it is truly additional. That needs to be ensured.
Thank you for that. We have a challenge ahead of us, and we'll make it happen. I wanted to ask Mr. Bhushan now to tell us a little bit about this principle about sort of incentivizing countries to put in more money. That has been also central in the design of this fund. We've been saying that the grant funding that the pandemic fund would provide should help countries prioritize their health systems and increase their own efforts to strengthen PPR. So it would be really great to have your perspective from India on how to make this happen.
Pandemic Fund is a successful example of collaboration for management of any future health emergency. And the world, we must admit, has gained a lot in terms of understanding of pathogens, including the fact that future health emergencies or pandemics would occur sooner than later. Given that almost 70% of infectious diseases are of zoonotic origin, strengthening One Health framework should be a key priority for prevention and control of health emergencies. It must be supplemented through systematic multi-sectoral collaboration between human health, animal health, and environment sector. Pandemic Fund should catalyze investment in building IHR core capacities, R&D and manufacturing for vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, and strengthening the public health workforce capacities, including repurposing of existing public health workforce. Member states will also have their unique needs and challenges regarding pandemic PPR, and hence support to countries should avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. The fund, along with WHO, could potentially catalyze and facilitate a collaborative country-wise mapping of health emergency management capacities within IHR framework so as to identify country-specific gaps and corresponding financial needs. This would facilitate identifying critical PPR gaps and thereby facilitate prioritizing of investment. The countries could then work with the implementing entities to fill the gap in collaboration with Pandemic Fund and Technical Advisory Panel. The Pandemic Fund would thus further spur and encourage country-level PPR investment on identified priorities, supplemented by additional resources through the Pandemic Fund. It will in effect converge the ongoing efforts across the world and the felt need at the field level in individual member country. Pandemic Fund can support dedicated stream of additional long-term financing to strengthen PPR capabilities, particularly in LMICs, and address critical gaps through investment and technical support at the national, regional, and global levels. It should also leverage the differential strengths and advantages of key stakeholders engaged in PPR and harness collaborative partnerships at national and regional level for universal health coverage. Health system strengthening to aid and strengthen emergency management as a long-term solution would be the key for our sustainable efforts, which the fund should prioritize going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Secretary Bhushan. If I may turn to Minister Giorgetti. Minister Giorgetti, what would the pandemic fund's success look like for you?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the fund's future. Establishing the fund is a very important achievement for all of us, but it is only the first step on this journey. We are still working on a first call for proposal and all the arrangements to make the fund operational. It will keep the focus and the resources on pandemic prevention and preparedness, even as other risks climb higher on agendas. To seize the opportunity, we need to move quickly to make the fund operational so that it can bring the desired impact. This means identifying countries with high potential for targeted investments through grants. Blended resources on loans have to be mobilized to allow the long-term stability of pandemic programs and the strengthening of continental and global systems. Our first investments should support some of the essential components of a country's preparedness: surveillance systems, laboratory capacities, and a trained and ready-to-operate workforce. The fund is also an opportunity to show the value of multilaterality. We could not have gathered such a broad group of donors without the efforts that the G20 put towards these objectives under Indonesia's leadership. I see also the fund as a tool that demonstrates the extent of the impact the global collaboration and global challenges can bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Minister. Professor Chow, what would you like the Pandemic Fund to accomplish?
Dear colleagues, dear ministers, the smooth running and operationalization of the fund has fully demonstrated the common aspirations and practical action for all parties to strengthen collaboration against pandemics and build towards the community of shared health for mankind. In order to ensure smooth running of the fund and maximize its effectiveness, China would like to make the following suggestions. First, ensuring the fund aligns its priorities with those of the WHO. China expects the Pandemic Fund to strengthen health system building, pandemic early warning, surveillance and response, public health, human resource development, and other key aspects related to pandemic-related work. The Pandemic Fund shall contribute to the innovation in the coordination and integration of care and prevention, improve public health system, enhance major health emergencies, early detection capabilities, intensify pandemic prevention, control and treatment and emergency response capacity, and prevent and control current and future pandemics. Second, ensuring there is inclusivity and transparency in its governance. China expects to deepen multilateral cooperation within the G20 framework and provide a sustainable political impetus for the fund. China calls for the fund to live up to its purpose, adhere to genuine multilateralism, reflect inclusivity, and a fair representation, build extensive partnerships, reflect fully upon voices of developing countries, and build itself into a new role model for global health financial cooperation. Third, ensuring the business and financial sustainability of the fund. China hopes that in its governance, the fund shall proceed from the national circumstances and concrete needs of developing countries, fully mobilize technical and funding resources from the World Bank, WHO, and other international financial organizations and health agencies, enhance its business and financial sustainability, and provide adequate and sustainable funding for technical support for the improvement pandemic PPR in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us, Professor Chow. If I can turn to Elena Flores, what do you see as the key drivers of success of the Pandemic Fund?
Thank you very much. I hear that we are very much converging, so I'm not going to refer to all the elements, but I would focus on 4 elements that I see as key drivers for success. The first one I would say is the fund has to deliver tangible results, which means that tangible results have to be there quickly, and that I think it depends very much on the appropriate priority setting, the design of the call for proposals, and the selection of concrete proposals. And I'm confident because I see that this work will need to be supported technically, and it has to be very strongly technically sound, and here I see the role of the technical advisory panel as key, led by the WHO, and that will be crucial to assess critical gaps and vulnerabilities and identify most relevant proposals. And I see this is very much now the focus of the work of the fund, including defining the results framework. In that context, I think that it is important that this first call of proposals can go out as soon as possible. I would expect that this as soon as possible should mean by the end of this year. And also for that first call, in order to provide tangible results, we think that the fund should have a clear focus on key areas. The key areas we see is 1, the collaborative and integrated disease surveillance. Second, lab capacity. Third, the health workforce capacity strengthening, and the One Health as a cross-cutting issue. The second element I wanted to mention is sustained financing. So we have now, as it has been said, 1.4 billion for the fund pledge. Clearly, additional pledges are needed, and it is important that the fund continues with ambitious outreach activities to both current and new potential donors, and including private sector, philanthropies, etc. The third element I would point is to stay relevant. Stay relevant means, from our perspective, that it should stay focused on its specific goals and be complementary, really complementary. Health is a very broad area, but this is a pandemic fund, so it has to be focused on that particular aspect. And the last element I would mention is good reputation. What I mean by that is that building reputation takes time, and it is important that it is shown through the quality of the selected projects, that the funds are properly delivered, that there is a solid oversight mechanisms and capacity to address potential fraud, and that the role of the implementing entities is absolutely essential here in building up also this good reputation. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may turn to Dr. Basri now, much has been achieved in a short period since the Pandemic Fund's board met for the first time on September 8th and 9th. Could you speak about some of the key achievements and what lies ahead, the priorities for you that lie ahead?
Thank you very much, Priya. First, perhaps allow me to mention about the key principles of this institution. There are about 3 main principles related to the issue of governance and operations. The first one is inclusive. The inclusivity is very important. And we can see about the proportion of this configuration of these voting seats, for example, consists of donor countries, co-investors, philanthropy, private sectors, and also the civil service organization. Yeah, that's the inclusive. The second one is the flexibility, because we do have this flexibility to deploy the resources through the regions or country and working with the existing institution. Yeah. Third is about the high standard of transparency and accountability, and that's very important. So based on these three principles, we continue to work, and then a couple of things that I can update you, that the governing board has adopted and agreed about 4 important documents. The first one is governance framework. The second one is manual operation. The third one is the contribution agreement template and financial procedure agreement templates. So with this, then we can start to, to make sure that this the fund is continue to work. And related to that, Elena mentioned about the importance of the TAP, Technical Advisory Panel. So the terms of reference of the TAP have been finalized and approved by the board, and the TAP is being formed. And I'm happy to inform you that the WHO has nominated Dr. Mike Ryan, Executive Director for Health Emergencies, to chair the TAP. And open call for applications of experts to serve the TAP was issued, and selection process is ongoing. Related to the issue of the resources, resource mobilization efforts continue with contribution announced last week, for example, by a couple countries, including, if I could mention, since Treasurer Chalmers is here, including Australia. And then now we are working about the 3 technical working groups to further develop and finalize the result framework, the project level co-financing and proposal application submission process, and funding allocation principles, and the design of the first call of proposals. Now, what lies ahead? I hear you, Elena. I think it is very important that your point about the sustainability of the funding, about the transparency, about the importance of the first call of proposals. So what we are preparing now at the fund is, we do understand that $1.4 billion is a good start, but it needs scalable. Yeah. So, so with limited resources, priorities is very important, exactly like what you said, and should have an impact, yeah, about the project itself. And in addition to that, we do understand that the first call of proposals will have a very significant impact, because if this first call of proposal has been successful, then it might attract additional funding to come. So that is why we need to make sure that this first call of proposals will be good, and we will evaluate. Perhaps, will not be perfect, but based on that we can evaluate, and then we do expect that the potential donors will put their contributions in the pandemic fund. And in the future, we probably have to think as well about the possibility of the innovative scheme financing. Yeah, I think that's all that I can update you related to this. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basri. And I think your last point, that success will speak for itself. We have to produce good results, and those good results in terms of real impact, in terms of strengthening prevention, preparedness, and response capacity at the country level will hopefully set a virtuous cycle of more support for the fund. So that's a great point, and it was really good to hear from you, Secretary Yellen, that you think we've got off on a good, strong basis in terms of the principles and the structure, and great to hear the convergence around what success means for our key partners and the key areas that we should be focusing on. Of course, we may not be able to focus on all of those areas in the first call for proposals, but this is a fund with an 8-year life to begin with, so we have some time to prioritize and sequence and achieve success. Before we move on to the third round, I'd like to call upon the Australian Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who's here with us today. Australia is a founding donor to the fund, and thank you, Treasurer Chalmers, and you just announced a top-up yesterday, so thank you for that. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Priya, for guiding our discussions today. Thank you to the panel for those insights. But most particularly, I think, thank you to President Widodo, to our friend Ibu Sri Mulyani, to the Indonesian ministers who are here, for your hospitality and also for the instrumental role that you've played in getting us to this point, working with our Italian friends as well. We are celebrating a really significant milestone today. But I think, as Secretary Yellen alluded to in her contribution at the very beginning, we're celebrating something a bit broader than that as well. And that is at a time when multilateralism is under pressure. What we are demonstrating today is that we can make progress in important and meaningful ways by working together to get the sort of outcome that we are talking about today when it comes to the pandemic fund. We have learned so much about ourselves, about our institutions, about our systems, about our relationships throughout this pandemic, and we're reminded again, particularly I think, of our responsibility to the most vulnerable people and the most vulnerable nations when we go through something like what we've all been through together over the course of the last couple of years. And so what we're doing with this fund and what we're doing more broadly and what we need to continue to do is to recognise that if we want secure, healthy, resilient economies, we need secure, healthy, resilient people and communities as well. And that's what this fund is about, and that's why the progress that we are acknowledging today is so important. If you think about it, just this year, we've agreed the Financial Intermediary Fund, negotiated the governance arrangements, garnered over $1.4 billion in pledges, and established and launched this new pandemic fund. And that's before you get to the very specific developments that Dr. Basri ran us through a moment ago as well. So it is worth acknowledging and celebrating that progress. From an Australian point of view, we are very proud to be a founding donor of the fund. We acknowledge the other 23 countries who've made a contribution already, and we are really pleased that we could change our initial commitment from $15 million to 50 million Australian dollars. And I think in particular, we welcome the inclusive nature of the fund, the way it's being designed, the way it will be implemented, to make sure that it is as inclusive as possible from an institutional point of view, but also when it comes to our brothers and sisters in the Pacific in particular, very near and dear to Australian hearts. And so I'm pleased to see the way that that has been incorporated. We're looking forward to playing a part in the implementation of the fund and to the first call for projects as well. And I'll finish on this point. We don't know, nobody in this room knows precisely what the next pandemic will look like, but we do all know, every one of us knows, that we need to be much better prepared for the next pandemic than we were for the last one. And that's why today is so important. It's why I'm really quite proud that Australia is part of this effort, and why I congratulate and thank all of you, but particularly our Indonesian friends, for getting us to this point.
Thank you very much. We will now move to the final round. Let me start with Secretary Yellen. Any key messages that you'd like to leave us with?
Thanks so much, Priya. First, Thanks to the founding donors, along with the co-contributors, the World Bank, the WHO. Priya, as you know from helping to lead the Secretariat, a lot of dedicated effort has gone into standing up the pandemic fund. Let me just conclude by noting that the pandemic fund and our G20 finance health work is not just about resources. It's about increased collaboration and cooperation across the multilateral system. It's easy for the world to forget the role that groups like the Financial Stability Board have played in preventing global financial crises, and I see similar potential for the G20 Finance Health Task Force. The establishment of the Pandemic Fund is just the first concrete deliverable. The Finance Health Task Force helped to facilitate the close coordination between finance and health ministries that identified gaps and propelled the pandemic fund forward, and that we're here today is a testament to the benefits of having a bold vision for what multilateral efforts can achieve. And I look forward to the task force taking further concrete steps to improve the global health architecture. Well, let me just end by saying what a pleasure it is to be here today with all of you to mark a very significant innovation in health financing that will keep us all safer. And a special thanks to our Indonesian hosts for arranging this, and congratulations for all that you've done that's led to this momentous achievement.
Thank you, Secretary Ellen. Minister Giorgetti, final words from you.
It has been an honor to be part of this panel today. It has been great to hear a lot of enthusiasm about the fund and this objective today, and to see how much it is valued and supported. We are here thanks to an incredible amount of effort over the past year from the Indonesia G20 presidency, from all the donors, from the World Bank, the World Health Organization, and other international organizations, and from many others who contributed to the debate. This is only the first step, and today we talked about some of the challenges that lie ahead. Success will require consistency and focus, but if the energy and commitment we saw in the early stage can continue to sustain the work of the fund, it will achieve great things. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Vice Minister Chao, key messages you'd like to leave us with?
Distinguished ministers, dear colleagues, history proves that solidarity and cooperation is the most effective weapon to conquer pandemics. Thanks to the proactive efforts of all parties, including G20, the successful establishment and operationalization of the fund reflects the proactive efforts of all parties to strengthen global cooperation against pandemics and to build towards a community of shared health for mankind. As a founding donor, China is ready to strengthen cooperation with all the other parties, intensify public health communication and exchanges, push for smooth running of the fund, and make greater contribution to the health of all. In order for the long-term success of the fund, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, hopefully the fund will earnestly implement the consensus of G20 leaders, effectively leverage the central coordinatory role of the WHO, and maximize the mobilization of existing institutions, mechanisms, and all available sources of funding. Secondly, we hope that the fund will observe the principle of inclusiveness, respect the decision of recipient countries, fully draw upon voices of developing countries, and reflect inclusivity and fair representation. Third, we would expect the fund to initiate the first call for funding proposals as soon as possible so as to provide timely and effective funding support for developing countries to improve their capacity in pandemic response, improving public health system, and respond to public health emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, at the 20th National Congress of Communist Party of China, which concluded of late, President Xi Jinping called for the promotion of world peace and development and the building of a community of shared future for mankind. In the cooperation in the framework of G20, China will work together with all the others to ensure the smooth running of the fund, make greater contribution to more robust and resilient post-COVID recovery, and safeguard a better and healthier future for mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Secretary Bhushan?
Thank you. Let me take this opportunity to applaud and commend the collective effort of all G20 members as well as all other stakeholders which enabled this milestone to be achieved. Going ahead, we feel that fund should aim to invest in creating an IT-enabled comprehensive global pandemic management platform encompassing every step of health emergency, from surveillance, containment, clinical management, including medical countermeasures, to provide robust data-driven insights to countries to manage future health emergencies. Creation of medical countermeasures, R&D, and manufacturing hubs need also to be prioritized by the fund. Transitioning from Indonesian presidency to Indian presidency, India would like to continue the momentum built by Indonesia, Italy, and the past presidencies with a view to consolidate and build on the efforts which have already been initiated. Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, while unveiling the logo for G20 Indian presidency, underlined that India will be guided by the overarching philosophy of one earth, one health, and one future in its endeavor. And we take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to this philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Deputy Director General Flores, last words from you, key messages.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to praise the effort of the G20 leadership and the work of the G20 Joint Health and Finance Task Force that have made it possible. And I would also like to thank everybody that has been involved in this operation from all levels, because it has been a very huge effort done in a very short period of time, and I think every single actor has been critical in making that happen. So thanks to all. I think it's also important to highlight this point that this has been possible because G20 had a common purpose. And somehow this common purpose was triggered by dramatic events, the COVID results. And I would like to wish that we learn the lesson, and that we learn the lesson that having a common purpose can deliver very good things, very important things, and even I would say very quickly. So let's apply that to other areas before they become dramatic. Now I would say we have to make it work. I already referred to that, so I will not repeat. So it's important to show the results. So the effort really needs to continue. And last point, this is not the only thing that is happening in the world of international health architecture. There are many works underway. I would name one, the work of the International Negotiation Body that is working on the Global Health Pandemic Agreement Treaty. The fund can also be instrumental to help in making progress in that respect and support the implementation of these kind of things. And last word, I think that as Secretary Yellen said, the challenges that the Health and Finance Task Force has to address are still numerous. And I really want to put the emphasis on that. I'm sure the task force is very able to deliver on that, and the work is ahead of us.
Thank you so much. Dr. Basri?
Thank you. Thank you, Priya. The fund alone cannot be a silver bullet. I think this message is also underscored in the opening remarks earlier, as well as with other distinguished panelists. It is part of wider array of initiative of domestic health sectors, as well as global health architecture that we are all working to take forward. So that's exactly as the Indonesian G20 presidency put it very well, that we want to recover stronger, recover together. So lastly, I very much look forward to working with you all as my role as a co-chair together with Dr. Daniel Ngabiji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Van Trotzenberg, concluding remarks?
Maybe 3 points. First, multilateralism matters, and it is important that to remind ourselves that this fund shows that we can still build global alliances. I would also say that in this year there was a second positive global event, was the successful replenishment of IDA 20, where we got also a global coalition in solidarity with the poorest countries. So that's good news that actually we can still do that. Secondly, leadership matters. And I think here the G20 said, I want really to thank the Italian and the Indonesian presidencies for having created and facilitated this result. It was very, very important. And then third, ultimately, focus matters. I think the fact that this fifth is focused single-mindedly on pandemic, not to say that there are not all the links, but that there is a clear focus that helps to create this coalition. We will need that. And finally, we will now to move to the implementation and tracking that indeed will make a difference on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really thank all our panelists for engaging with us, for giving us time, for sharing your ideas and your guidance. And you know, this has been a really interesting discussion. Taken copious notes, and we'll make sure that we translate, you know, all of the guidance that you've given us today into the operationalization of the fifth. I think we've heard today that multilateralism can work. That this is a testament to multilateralism. That leadership matters. We will be focused, and we will produce results. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Basri and Dr. Angamije as our co-chairs leading the board. So thank you all very much, and it was great to discuss with you this afternoon. Thank you so much.
It doesn't work on the phone.
Please take a moment for a picture together. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Priya, and all speakers for bringing us to a very productive session today. The last remark from Bapak Budi Gunadi?
Yes.
To Bapak. Stage is yours.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I've been with Ibu Sri Mulyani for the last 2 days, and many local journalists are asking me why the Minister of Health is always with Minister of Finance. But the foreign journalists have a different questions. They ask, why people with zero health background and 30 years of finance and banking background become the first health minister in the country. So I shared with them that, hey, this global health crisis, pandemic, has cost us around 12 trillion US dollar. The financial cost to the global economy. It's much bigger than the previous global financial crisis that I just checked with Professor Khatib Basri is around 2 trillion US dollar. And as a banker for 30 years, I've seen that in global finance, you have two great institutions like the IMF and World Bank that have capacity